Thank you. Member continue.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I thank you for the opportunity to speak to Bill 10, the Income Tax Amendment Act. I started yesterday afternoon. I'd like to recap some of my comments and then continue. This bill aims to bring the NDP's liquefied natural gas framework into force. It details the publicly funded handouts that are being offered to industry in exchange for the expansion of natural gas development in this province. It trades tax breaks for the construction of the single biggest point source of greenhouse gas emissions in the history of Canada. My caucus colleagues and I have been clear, we will never support an expansion of taxpayer-funded giveaways to help support the fossil fuel industry. We will not help the BC NDP implement an LNG regime, and we will not be complicit in our silence. We will use our votes and our voices to say no, because this is the wrong decision and the wrong direction for our province in 2019. We will not now, not ever, vote to advance major fossil fuel expansion, and we will continue to work to advance, instead, strong climate policy for this province. Because communities are already facing significant impacts from climate change. Whether it's wildfires, floods, droughts, species extinction, or crop failures, BC's communities are at the front line of this fight. By pursuing LNG, you're tying our communities to an industry that is contributing to these challenges while failing to invest in a sustainable, low-carbon future. The world's leading climate scientists have warned us time and time again that if global emissions do not start to dramatically decline in the next few years, many millions of people, including British Columbians, will be at severe risk. Ecosystems, plants, and animals are facing widespread extinction. The future of humanity, as we know, hangs in the balance. We only have until 2030 to keep global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, beyond which even half a degree will significantly worsen the climate change impacts and drag hundreds of millions of people into poverty. This is not new information. Scientists have been raising concerns about what their data has shown for decades. What is new, however, is how urgent and dire the scientific warnings have become. In recent years, the consequences of rising CO2 and temperatures have been painfully clear. We are on target to see ocean surface acidity into a realm for which we have no known comparison in the history of the Earth. Coral beds that have been around for millions of years will go extinct. And in Canada, overall precipitation will increase, but it will come in fewer, more extreme events interspersed between longer periods of drought. There will be an increased risk of flooding, and then there will be wildfires, as we have already seen summer after summer in British Columbia. Think for a moment about the massive crop failures, economic collapse, and millions of climate refugees desperate for safer homes. Our growing consumption levels are unsustainable on an Earth with finite resources, and the limit is clearly in view. The amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere now far exceeds the natural range of the last 650,000 years, and it is still rising very quickly because of decisions like the one before us today. Reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have made it painfully clear we have only a few short years to steer away from catastrophic climate change by dramatically reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, starting now. And yet, in the face of all of that, the vast majority of members in this House are selling out to score a fossil fuel project that plans to drastically increase our emissions from 2023 through to the year 2060. LNG Canada, a project set to become the single biggest point source of emissions in our country's history, will pollute until after your children have retired. It will pollute the province your grandchildren are born into. Choosing to take action on climate change is a luxury that is expiring. Soon the realities of climate change will come flooding in through our front doors. We must not squander this opportunity. This legislation, Bill 10, steers BC in a direction that we don't need or want to go. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can write a new story for our province. We have such enormous potential in BC to be a leader in clean energy. Geothermal, wind, solar, wave on top of our already established and stable hydro energy. We have everything we need to rise to this challenge if government truly sets us in the direction of a sustainable future. Sweden, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Scotland, Germany, Uruguay, and Denmark are all showing leadership by shifting to renewables. Tanzania is launching a massive tree planting effort and has a national climate change strategy built on the acknowledgement that all countries have a role to play and they too will do their part. Nearly 50 countries around the world have committed to being 100% renewable by 2035, including many countries that are most impacted by climate change due to droughts, floods, and rising seas: the Philippines, Kenya, Ethiopia, Dominican Republic, Guatemala. 100% renewable by 2035, right around the same time that LNG Canada will be ramping up fracking across northern BC. What are the implications of jurisdictions setting these ambitious goals? Cleaner air, safer water for a start. And while we reshape our energy, we can reshape our communities in ways that help us live better. Transportation that incorporates more multimodal ways of getting around. Economies that focus on local food, local manufacturing, and local benefits staying inside our communities. Consider the temporary jobs for the LNG industry, people having to be far away from their homes, their families, their communities. We should be focused on creating an economy that keeps families together and keeps communities and well-being at the center of all of our decision-making. And the money that's been promised by these fossil fuel corporations, $20 billion over 40 years, that will pale in comparison to the true costs of climate change, the emergency funding government will have to funnel into communities that are underwater or up in flames or unable to produce food. Ensuring that every British Columbian has the conditions to live a healthy, fulfilling life in a flourishing, supportive environment should be the government's most important responsibilities. Our job is to make people know that they are safe. I don't know if any of you were at the students' climate strike 10 days ago, but children, over 1.5 million children around the world, and over 1,000 on the lawns of this legislature, are telling us they do not feel safe. What a mark of our failure that children are telling us that they do not feel safe because of the decisions that we are making. I saw dozens of children at the strike with hand-painted signs that said, "The seas are rising and so are we." A change in the tide is coming. Young people are standing up, demanding a new story for our world, and they are joined, I noticed at the climate strike, by their grandparents and their parents. Our youth and elders joined by a clear vision of what is right, too young and too old to feel enslaved by the rules that we have invented for ourselves. They know the story that has guided the last 100 years in this province is failing us. The story of separation and accumulation above all else has driven us to maximize individual production and personal self-interest. It demands continued consumption and economic growth and ignores the fact that infinite growth is not possible on a finite planet. It is a recipe for despair, but adults have been fully steeped in it. We absorb it, act like it is the only way. If you don't believe that we are all separate from each other, separate from nature, that more for me is less for you, it drives competition, a failing urge to control and dominate. To paraphrase the writer Charles Eisenstein, we need a new story that recognizes interdependence, a belief that my well-being is directly related to your well-being, to the well-being of the river, the forest, the salmon, to the well-being of children. An understanding and acceptance that what we do to the world, we do to ourselves. Even if we can physically survive after the last orca or the last caribou or the last steelhead has gone extinct, when life around us withers and dies, what kind of life have we left for ourselves? Why is it that people with more than their fair share of money and power still feel depressed and empty? Deep down, we all know what is actually important, and it is love, it is connection, it is family, it is community, it is life. But despite this wisdom, we make the most important decisions in our province from a place of indifference, separation, degradation, and desperation. But I can see that our confidence in this system is falling apart. It is eroding from the inside. I know it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to protect caribou at the same time that you're seeing the destruction of their habitat. It doesn't feel good to work towards reconciliation at the same time that Indigenous newborns are separated from their mothers. It doesn't feel good to advance climate action at the same time as voting to support the biggest point source of greenhouse gas emissions in the history of this nation. And I know it's not easy. You feel powerless to the larger powers, and never mind the fact that most people think we are the larger powers. You feel caught in a system that leaves you no choice, tied to a vote that is truly not your own. It doesn't have to be this way. A more beautiful world is possible. We get glimpses of it every now and then, in love and in nature, when we are with our children, experiences that make us feel alive, that remind us that a brighter future is actually within reach. These feelings don't have to be scarce. They can guide how we govern. It looks hopeless as we near the end stages of the old story, but it is also an opportunity for us to write a new story. Our new story can be enriched with the lessons that we've learned from the past. We can have a revolution for life, for a province that is prosperous and healthy, for a province that is safe for our children and for their grandchildren. Voting to support Bill 10 is not just voting for more money, the story that we've been told over and over again. It is also voting for all of the additional hard decisions associated with expanding major fossil fuel extraction in a climate change future. It is voting to push our province to the brink. I, for one, along with my colleagues, will vote against Bill 10. I choose to stand with the children and the elders who believe in a brighter future instead. It's not too late for every member in this room to stand with us. We can go all in on Clean BC, implementing first phase of policies fully and urgently while we detail the remaining 25% emissions reductions when we come from, a task made much easier without LNG Canada in the equation. We can set ambitious goals for our province, joining the other leaders around the world who have committed to being powered by 100% renewable energy by 2035. We can export our expertise and experience and help other jurisdictions follow suit. We can be leaders rather than the laggards who will be looking out from BC and looking out from Canada at the rest of the world reaching their climate goals, while we double down on the energy of the 20th century and a fossil fuel industry that needs taxpayer support in order to survive. We can support British Columbians as they find a sustainable job that is right for them and their communities. We can learn from local and traditional knowledge. And we will continue to work on the many initiatives that matter to us, protecting salmon and protecting the watersheds that they depend on, bringing a new vision forward for forests for BC, continuing to track the progress and changes to environmental assessment and professional reliance that begin to restore trust in government decision-making, pushing for better policies and initiatives that will address the humanitarian crisis of the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in government care, working to bring forward the possibilities that abound in Clean BC and to truly transform BC, changing everything from how we build buildings to how we get around our communities and around the province. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to move an amendment. Here is a copy of it for Mr. Speaker, and I have copies for the House leaders of the other two parties so that they can have it. I'll read it to you, Mr. Speaker, while it's being circulated. I would move that the motion for second reading of Bill Number 10, intituled Income Tax Amendment Act 2019, be amended by deleting all of the words after that and substituting therefore the following: Bill Number 10 not be read a second time now, but that the subject matter be referred to the Select Standing Committee on Finance and Government Services. Mr. Speaker, I am moving this amendment because I believe it is essential that we exhaust every opportunity to hear from the communities and the people across our province on this issue. I think it is important that everyone understands the choices that we are making, and that in passing this legislation, we are choosing to pursue a taxpayer-supported expansion of the fossil fuel industry instead of pursuing a new vision for our province. If the student protest of a couple weeks ago are any indication, there is much this government needs to hear. Can I speak to the amendment? I'm going to speak for a few minutes to the amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to reflect on something a little bit different than what I've been talking about so far. I'm going to reflect on the Westminster parliamentary system. I spent many years studying medieval history, and it was during the Middle Ages that the origins of our system, the system we work in right now, the traditions that we work within, came from. Today, the Lieutenant Governor occupies a largely ceremonial role most of the time, but the foundations of Parliament came from a desire to put a check on the absolute powers of the King or the Queen. The idea was that parliamentarians would represent the interests of the people, and that while in its beginning stages, the Westminster parliamentary system, people may have been rather narrowly defined at the time as male landowners, the foundations of parliamentary democracy have within them both an extraordinary opportunity and an enormous burden of responsibility. The opportunity is for representation of the views, the wishes, the perspectives, and the well-being of constituents within the halls of Parliament, a true reflection of representative democracy. The burden is that we all have to do our best to balance the differing views, wishes, perspectives of our constituents while keeping the well-being of all citizens at the forefront of our minds. But I would argue that the parliamentary democracy in our province and our country has become distorted by partisan, party-oriented politics. How does this translate? It means that MLAs not only have to consider the differing views, wishes, perspectives of constituents, as well as the well-being of all citizens, they also have to put the interests of their political party into their deliberations. In Canada and in BC, this has increasingly translated into a concentration of power in the office of the Prime Minister or the Premier, the exact opposite of what parliamentary democracy was originally created to do, which is to put the power into the hands of every member of Parliament. This leaves MLAs and MPs in a position where they need to vote with their parties, even if they don't agree with a position being put forward. But let's look at what's happening in Britain right now. I checked right before QP, but right before question period. MPs are voting on a variety of options for a path forward from the quagmire that they are in because of Brexit. And they're choosing from 8 options, including having another referendum. How is it that they've gotten to this place? Well, the Prime Minister kept bringing forward her plans for Brexit, and the Parliament and the parliamentarians within her own party and outside of her party disagreed with her and disagreed with the plan that she put forward and said that no, we're here to represent our constituents and the well-being of this entire country. We are not going to vote with you just because you're the Prime Minister. They have demonstrated the way that a Westminster parliamentary system is supposed to work, in that every member of the Parliament has exactly the same power as every other member. Whether you're the Premier, or the backbencher in the opposition, or the backbencher in the government party, or one of a three-member caucus, your vote is exactly 1/87th of the votes in this House. I say to each of the 83 MLAs in the other two parties, understand that you as an MLA have the same amount of power in this chamber as every other member, and you have every right to exercise your vote and your power exactly the way you want to do it. You should exercise that vote and that power in a manner that reflects the many views, the opinions, the perspectives of your constituents, while also putting the well-being of all citizens and all future citizens at the center of your decision-making. I've made an extensive case for the need for us to choose a direction for our province that leads us to a clean, prosperous, healthy, safe future. A future that we can be proud to leave as a legacy for future generations. And I've made the case to recognize that adding the single biggest point source emitter of greenhouse gases in the country's history in 2019 makes no sense. We will be remembered for this moment. We will be looked back on in this moment, and it will be recognized that we made a choice that does not serve the well-being of every citizen of this province, and it certainly does not serve the well-being of every future citizen of this province. It's 2019. The science is clear. There's no debate. We need to dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions starting now, not dramatically increase them by giving government funds, taxpayer support to an industry that only survives if it is subsidized. It feels like we're in a topsy-turvy world right now. It feels hard to believe that we're even debating this. It feels like an enormous burden that we are trying to explain this to young people around BC and around this world, that we are making this decision knowing what we know. I am putting forward this amendment to refer this bill to committee, and I am making the case for every MLA to recognize that you can exercise your responsibility. You can exercise your power. You can choose to do what you know is the right thing. 85% of Canadians want to see their governments take action on climate change. That is an overwhelming majority of Canadians who are asking us, as the elected representatives, to do what they know needs to be done. We must act quickly. We must take this threat seriously. And so I put this amendment forward. This is an opportunity for everyone in this House, everyone in this chamber, to say, I can do the right thing. Because we know that the right thing is not to increase our emissions at this time. Thank you.